All right. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is Thursday, so it's Jordan Peterson Thursday, and we've been covering this series on personality and its transformations. Today, we're going to be talking about Carl Rogers and authentic relating. This is one of the favorite topics. We spent a lot of time on it in our New York meetups. And so very excited about it. And Claire is going to be presenting, and it's going to be interactive. So Claire will have two different presentations. And then we're going to invite first people who have watched the video or are familiar with Carl Rogers and authentic relating to give their comments. And then we'll do Q&A. Then we'll do the second part of Claire's presentation. Again, comments from others, Q&A, and then we are going to do breakout rooms. That's the plan. So Claire, take it away.
Thank you, Shrikant. Welcome, Peterson family, to another Jordan Peterson Thursdays. Today we're going to be talking about Rogers. That's Carl, not Mr. So if you're here for Mr. Rogers, please leave. If you're here for Carl, welcome. We're going to talk about some themes that we might have talked about and you might have heard about. I mean, two of the rules, I think in particular, that we covered when we talked about 12 rules are really pertinent here. The first is tell the truth, or at least don't lie. You're going to hear a lot of that. And the second is assume that the person you're listening to might know something that you don't. So there's a lot of Rogers injected in all Petersonian thought, but we're just going to go through it really specifically today and talk about phenomenology and just kind of the basic of this thought system. So before I jump into it, just wanted to give a little bit of an anecdote about myself. So no surprise to you, those of you that know me, but I was a fairly sort of confident and outspoken and open child. I always really liked ideas, and I really sort of craved being different and being independent, being a devil's advocate, sort of leaning into contradiction. So for example, I went to a Catholic sort of rigid elementary school, and I was a vegetarian. I shaved my head. I protested against George Bush, whatever that meant for an elementary school student. And then in high school, I went to a much more liberal environment where I sort of joined the debate club to oppose Obamacare. I reconnected with my Catholicism, and I really became sort of more conservative. And what this kind of bred in me as a young adolescent is started to breed kind of a feeling of nihilism. I started to sort of lie to people in order to achieve some ends that I perceived. I started to manipulate my environment in order to provide for that contradiction. I started to do sort of the bare minimum in my life and in my studies as almost a badge of intelligence or a badge of honor. And this tendency, it made me very open to ideas. It made me really good at kind of communicating with different types of people. But by the time I graduated high school, it also really made me quite deeply depressed. I started to sort of sleep constantly. I became largely irritable with my loved ones. And it's as if I sort of started to believe everything and therefore nothing. And from this came the nihilism. And so you'll imagine my horror when my senior yearbook was released and I was voted most likely to have a career that contradicts her beliefs. I kid you not, that's what it said. So fast forward to today, and Carl Rogers' philosophy has really helped provide an anecdote to this kind of confusing duality that plagued me, and I think plagues a lot of us as we're, coming up in the world and trying to understand our belief systems. It was only really in being able to sort of communicate my beliefs honestly with other people that I started to iron out these contradictions in my consciousness and in my value system, and start to integrate them in a hierarchy that allowed me to interact with the world more efficiently. And from this, I began to recover from mental illness. So all this to say that these concepts, which seem quite simple, communication, honesty, they really are quite profound when you start to integrate them with your life. So Rogers, at the very highest level was an advocate of sort of the therapeutic utility in genuine, honest communication. And he was one of the first pioneers of these ideas of sort of self-actualization and integration through those concepts of honesty and honest communication. So Rogers was a phenomenologist, and what that means is phenomenologists really bear in the realm of consciousness, and they accept consciousness really as a fact, not something to be argued against, or not something that, you know, it is a solid piece in which we interact with the world. So phenomenology is the philosophical study of the structures of experience and consciousness. It was a philosophical movement, and it was founded in the early years of the 20th century. And it's really concerned with these kind of systematic reflection on the structures of consciousness, the structures of our brain, and you know, in contrast to kind of previous thought systems that really saw the world as objects to interact with, you know, in contrast to that, phenomenology kind of exists in the realm rather of being. So, and being not sort of the reality of objects. And in this way, sort of the entirety of the experiences that go on within our consciousness are real, just as real as kind of previous scientists might have thought about objects. So whether they're dreams, whether they're fantasies, whether they're delusions, they're all to be perceived as real because they exist within the realm of someone's consciousness. That doesn't necessarily mean that they all belong in the same category or that they're equally real, but they can't be discounted as not being real. And they need to be sort of integrated to get back to that central purpose of life. So the Rogerian thought here says that really, in order to be able to help someone, in order to be able to speak to someone, you have to put someone in your shoes. And that means adopting the viewpoint and the reality that manifests, from which they go through life, that manifests life through them. And so in doing this, you can start to develop what he saw as sort of an empathetic understanding of the person you're talking to and the communication that you're having. So Rogers was a devout Protestant, really typical of this time in kind of the 30s and 40s. And Peterson wants us to understand this because, like all thinkers, we need to sort of have an understanding of the axiom with which he developed his thought system. So he has this sort of devout Protestant center, which is quite logos based or word based, so we can understand that communication element. But his father was also a farmer, and a scientific farmer at that. I don't really know what a scientific farmer is, but I assume it's someone that farms scientifically. And this helped Rogers develop really a deep understanding of the scientific method and really a more experimental way of interacting with the world. So Peterson tells a story of Rogers being like on a boat as a missionary, a Protestant missionary, going to China, and starting to have this doubt of his belief system and sort of his staunch Protestantism. It doesn't mean that he abandoned them, but what we really start to see is that he incorporates these ideas into his psychotherapy and his belief system. So the center of this, the core of this, as I alluded to, is that reality and kind of the truth is to be had or is to be understood in direct and honest communication between two people. And it's in that exchange that the idea of sort of the living word emerges, the logos emerges. And so what Rogers kind of wants us to think about is integrating ourselves properly at every sort of level of analysis in that communication, so that we can exist in a way that is optimally beneficial for us and our life and our kind of understanding of the world, as well as the person we're having a conversation with. And so it's in that mutual beneficial conversation that really the magic kind of unfolds. So Peterson says there's a few different ways that we can use our words. Most often, we use words instrumentally. That's what I was doing mostly as an angsty high schooler, trying to get what they wanted out of the world. We use words as an instrument for some outcome. How can I get what I want out of another person? And so here we start to see sort of these tendencies of really pathological tendencies of psychopaths, right? Or the kind of pickup artist tricks of what can I say that will get me the outcome I want, regardless of who this person is or what their belief systems are. How can I manipulate the world to get the outcomes? So understanding that kind of realm of thought, what are our other options? Well, the Rogerian position is to rather become aware of kind of the totality of subjective experience, so that you not only feel your experience, but you can represent it accurately and honestly through articulation. And in doing so, this becomes sort of a movement, a physical movement toward health as an integrated process. It's a very body-focused outcome, and your outcome really is the good life, right? You're attempting to state the truth towards some perceived kind of end goal, and the best you can do along the way really is not lie. So of course, that's back to this Peterson's rule: tell the truth, or at least don't lie. It's really hard to tell the truth, because how can we know what the truth is often? But can we at least kind of engage in an honest communication, and do the best we can not to lie? So really becomes the moral obligation of therapists, is not to lie, to sit in honest communication, to listen openly. And for Rogers, this really is sort of the more moral element of the therapeutic process. We don't tend to normally include kind of morality in psychotherapy. Jung was kind of one of the first ones that started to do this, because he realized, hey, people come to see therapists because they have deep moral problems, that there's actions that they have taken that are just deeply immoral. And it's not often in the doing of the action that is the immorality, but in our trying to go on with life as if we hadn't done that, or as if everything was normal. So that lack of sort of integration of immorality, which we perceive as being sort of everywhere. So as part of this therapeutic process that Rogers advocated for, involved this ironing out really of contradictions between these different phenomenal fields of our psyche and of our understanding of the world. So what this looks like is when you say something and you mean something else. You say something and you act in a way that contradicts it. So often we do this consciously. We do it kind of in more pathological ways to get an outcome in work, to get an outcome in a relationship, to get something we want. But it also happens really often subconsciously. And the example that Peterson even uses here is teenagers. And even if you think of like every teenage movie or teenage TV show ever, what you see is adolescents being pulled in a lot of different social directions. They have a lot of different contradictory relationships between whatever it is, the geeks and the jocks, freaks and geeks, whatever that might be. And while, these directions, they're also really quite moral, right? That we need to make these decisions, not just about who we talk to or what we wear, but they're moral decisions, and making one in one direction, but acting the other way or communicating the other way creates really a deep moral rift that can be quite detrimental. So, of course, at the end of all of these teenage movies, what happens, right, is this teen comes to some greater, higher realization, which integrates whatever happened in this plot line. It integrates, their parents with their friends, or whatever those opposing forces are, and in that way they can use language really honestly and as the kind of the word of God or the logos, rather than a tool to achieve some sort of an end. So another example, let's say you're at work and someone tells you to do something that you really don't want to do, that you kind of feel kind of gross about. It doesn't need to be hard, hugely unethical, but you kind of avoid it, right? It's hard to get you motivated to do it. Well, you could just do it, but why can't you? Why do we feel opposed deeply to do something that feels kind of slightly immoral? And Peterson says that it's because a thing can't be itself and something else at the same time. So we can't do an action that we perceive as immoral and rationalize it or talk it out or say that it's not at the same time. It just won't settle with us. We just know better. Our consciousness understands, and it creates sort of this tumor that we need to kind of cut out. And so in this way, he encourages us to follow what he calls the principle of non-contradiction. You have to organize yourself and your understanding of the world in a non-contradictory manner. Or what's the other option is you just feel negative emotion, right? It's not until we've integrated those different disparate parts that we can kind of let go of that negative emotion, or it doesn't follow us around. Let's see how I'm doing here. I'll pause. Pegor, anything to add?
Not really. I think you covered pretty much the first part of the talk. Besides the point that he really emphasizes that it's a moral endeavor. Like the person has to genuinely want to improve, and they should have accept that their current mode of being is not working anymore, and things need to change. And he does mention, like, if someone is like court mandated to go to therapy, if they don't want to get better, they're not going to get better. Like even if they spend like 10 years with a therapist, they're not going to improve.
Absolutely. And this thought system really flies in contrast to sort of postmodern theory that might say that really there's nothing outside of the text, and that everything in life and things are sort of infinitely malleable. Pain is not textual, unfortunately, and you can really manipulate pain and you can create things about it. The example Peterson uses that you can teach a dog that hunger is punishing by every time you feed it, like hitting it, and it will starve itself. So the impact of pain is not based in the text. There's something far larger here. And Peterson says if you weave a narrative, even if it's complex and if it's sophisticated, that doesn't necessarily mean that the actions that you are going to take are going to line up with the best part of your personality, and that's going to create contradictions moving forward. And so, the higher level those contradictions are, the more trouble you're going to have. And this lines up with Peterson's kind of hierarchy of thought, right? So if you're inputting information that doesn't really map up with your existing kind of viewpoint of the world, depending on how high up that is, that's really going to be unsettling and kind of plague you from internally. Peterson, this quote is so simple, but it's spot on. Peterson says, "I have never seen anyone get away with anything." And I think that that's really the point here, is that yes, it might feel like we're getting away with things. It might feel like we're coming to terms with whatever that thing is, but in the truth, everything we do that isn't in line with our honest pursuit of the truth will come back around to bite us. And so why not kind of pursue that at the onset? And it's possible that you might have blinded yourself so badly that you can't even see that causal connection. Sometimes people do put themselves so deep into these situations that they don't know how to get out. But Peterson really, emphasizes taking that one step at a time, paying attention to the one element that you can fix, that you do understand about yourself, and letting that kind of snowball from there. So for Rogers, the form of optimal sort of organization of our psyche and organizing our belief system, that is the final goal that we're working towards. Now, that doesn't mean that it's static, right? We are always going to be encountering new contradictions as we're moving forward. Always. That's living, that's learning, but it's really up to us to organize that response to those contradictions so that they don't always unsettle you. And they will. If that contradiction is really high up in your belief system, that's going to be really unsettling. You're going to head into chaos for a while. But it's up to you again to reorganize those contradictions. The hierarchy you make for yourself for your own belief system is also much in line with the hierarchy in which you fit into the world. Those things are really closely associated. And so when you start to destabilize yourself and your own belief system, I believe this, but I say this, I believe these two things, but they're contradictory. You also, the adverse effect is you destabilize the way you interact with the other hierarchies around you. And again, the other even conversations that you're having. So I'm going to pause, and then I think we'll move next into our next section, sort of about communication and goodness. But I'll pause here just on this basic elements.
All right, so folks, so first I want to give chance to people who are familiar with Carl Rogers or who have watched this video to comment on anything, on any aspect that we've talked about or any aspect of Carl Rogers' approach. So in order to do that, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Keep on topic, be brief, speak your mind, disagree with anybody you want, and do so courteously. Next up is going to be Jyoti, Joe, and Judith. All J's. Jyoti, go ahead.
Okay, my understanding is that this kind of therapy is meant for educated people, people who want to be changed, who understand where the therapist is coming from. It is client based, centered towards the client, not towards the therapist. How is that possible for a person like a court appointee court case where the subject is not very smart, very intelligent? Is he going to respond to that kind of therapy?
So I think that the basis here is inaccurate in that in any honest communication, even between a therapist and a patient, both parties are actually getting something out of the conversation. And that's a purely Rogerian idea here, in that there is a joint exploration going on in the world. And I'm going to talk more about in this next section. And this also goes back to Peterson's idea of assume that everyone you're talking to has something that you can learn from them. And so I really think regardless of education, background, socioeconomic, whatever it is, the ask here is really just to have a honest, truthful conversation in which one party is saying thing, the other one is honestly listening, reflecting back what they've heard, and then this dynamic goes back and forth. We're going to go really in depth into that into the next section.
So you are assuming that the client is honest.
In Rogerian thought, you are. That's the ask, and that's the pure problem. If you aren't, that's where you got to start.
Next up is going to be Joe, Judith, Marisa, and Stephen. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to build on the idea of honesty within this context. Is that something that I only got an opportunity to listen to part of the video, but the idea was that we don't know what the truth is. And I'm kind of trying to figure out what's the balance here. Is it this integrating ethics into the human psychology, into how therapy is performed? And then the other is, I do think you can get the truth. Truth is something when you speak out against what you truly believe. It doesn't necessarily have to be true, but if you're actually speaking out against yourself and what you believe, then you're lying, right? So then you're actually misleading, and then you're also misleading yourself. So I do think that there's an element here where I kind of disagreed with the concept of, well, we just don't know enough to know what's true. We do. I think and I think that there's a natural human ethic that comes into the idea of, and you can kind of see this from his religious background, I'm assuming, that where you kind of see that in the psychology and the evaluation of the psychology. The other is the phenomenology is pretty interesting as well, as far as how experience is concerned, but I'll just leave it there for a moment. Is it mostly just about ethics? Is he integrating ethics into psychology?
Yep, you hit the nail on the head here. And the basis is that humans are inherently good, and that evil isn't some third-party force, but evil is rather just the absence of good. So there is, a very kind of basis in this kind of Christian idea of the intrinsic good of all people and the morality inherent in them. We'll talk more about that also.
So next up is Judith.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you could explain a little better for me to understand the hierarchy idea. Is that something that is very individual, but a combination of the society that you're in? Or could you give me an example so I can sort of visualize what that means, a hierarchy, and the higher you get, the more trouble you're at? I couldn't quite grasp it. How that would play out.
Right. So this idea of hierarchy is one that's really it's the basis of a lot of Petersonian thought. And the idea here is that all systems exist, even dating back to the most prehistoric creatures that have been on this earth for a really long time, exist in some sort of a hierarchy with one another. And these are systems or maps that we use to make the world really much just simpler, right? Easier to interact with. Because if not, every interaction we had would have to be new, right? And so there's these systems of hierarchies which allow us to place our values in line. Do I believe this? Do I believe it more strongly than this or another? And so I think that in this case, that's what we're speaking to, is the hierarchy of thought as we use that to interact with other people's hierarchy of thought. In sort of different value systems. There's also another element here, which is kind of the idea of the dominance hierarchy, which has to do with kind of the games that are being played in the world, right? There's always all sorts of games going on in every interaction that we have. And so, even our hierarchies of thought need to align with being able to play that game as ethically as possible, as often as possible. So it's a deep concept. It really pertains to most of what Peterson says. But in this case, what we're really talking about is how do you stack your belief system, and how do you use that to interact with the world, so that if something comes at it that doesn't stack up with your beliefs, you then need to rearrange your map.
Next up is going to be Marisa, Stephen, and Mike. Marisa, go ahead.
Hi, so I really resonate with the concept from Jordan Peterson of tell the truth or at least don't lie. I find this concept that he's telling us about in what we're chatting today with Carl Rogers is almost as simple and certainly as profound. And I would sum up the video that we watched as just a very small phrase that he says, early on in the video, actually, he says, honest communication heals. And I find that sums up everything that he said before and everything that he says after. And if you watch any of his other videos on Carl Rogers or on Listening, that's kind of what he's saying. He's saying the good life is stating the truth as you see it. So, Joe brought up, I believe it's true if I'm trying to say what I believe. And that's actually what Peterson is telling us. He's telling us that it's only going to be, it's from a 1,000-foot stage, it's partial truth, right? But from an inner level towards where we are, it is our truth. It's the truth as we see it. But the key there is that we must be open to the possibility that the person or people with whom we are speaking and listening to will change our perception, our subjective perception of what we are calling truth. And I find that to be what he's telling us here. Sure, if you're stopping and being aware and you're speaking with awareness, you are speaking the truth as you see it. But the only way that you're truly conversating is if, in addition to that, you are open to hearing others at the risk of your truth potentially even being entirely exploded. So sorry, I didn't really have a question, but that was
No,
just
that's
It's beautifully said, Maritza. And I think I would even go so far as to say that honest communication is almost the only thing that heals. Like, herein lies the power. That conversation between us and ourselves, and the darkest part of ourselves, that conversation between us and others, like in which we learn about ourselves just through someone's facial expressions. Herein lies the magic. Thank you for sharing that.
Let me just emphasize. I think what Marisa did was beautiful, maybe because it really captures the entire Rogerian thought very beautifully. That's all it is. I invite everybody to watch more videos of Carl Rogers, and that it's that simple. And it is being kind of honest with yourself and honest with others, and that actually melts away a lot of kind of defenses, misconceptions, all of that. And you can't do it by yourself. You can't do everything by yourself. The fact that you can talk to another human being, and the fact that you can actually listen to another human being, allows you kind of a range of possibilities, range of feedback and a way of kind of correcting yourself, way of kind of seeing different perspectives, because we have all kinds of tendencies of getting locked into certain perspectives. So we get used to looking at things a certain way for so long that we are blind to other things. Whereas if you're actually listening to another person, you can actually see them seeing things in a slightly different way, or maybe radically different way. And then you say, oh, I didn't know that was possible. So that was really beautifully put. Thank you, Marisa. Next up is Stephen and Mike. Stephen, go ahead.
Hi, Shukran. Hi, Claire. Peterson mentions that anybody that does something immoral or something wrong never gets over it, or is going to be bothered by it. Thank you for sharing your personal story, Claire. You mentioned mental illness. I think that you were referring to yourself. So I was wondering, like, what was it, or what? And I think this might be a segue from last, but I don't want to put thoughts or words into your mouth. That made you. What was it that made you realize? Now, Carl Rogers would say that this is something that we're going through life, similar to Maslow's hierarchy and self-actualization, which we never really achieved. But at what point, what was it that broke you for that?
This is a cheesy answer, but I think it was that one day I turned on the Joe Rogan podcast and there was a Jordan Peterson interview on it. I mean, it sounds silly. I think part of it was also just coming of age and integrating values. But I think I often thought of the contradictions as almost currency. Like I thought it was impressive to live in contradiction and have all these disparate opinions and kind of float between them. And it wasn't until Peterson said, hey, bucko, sort this stuff out. This is not working for you, that I sort of became happy.
It's admirable, and it's that you were honest with yourself too.
Sure.
Next up is Mike.
I listened to the tapes and heard of some of these before. I have difficulty, particularly as it goes in practice and how the examples in the tapes go, how you differentiate all the different kinds of CBT and Ericksonian and Jungian, and what is the salient feature of Rogerian therapy that makes it that it would describe it? Positive psychology and Seligman sounds a lot too like all of this in practice.
I would say the hallmark here is that genuine, honest conversation. And the idea of sort of the two parties trying to have a joint exploration with no goal other than understanding each other. But hey, there's overlaps, there's contradictions. I mean, these guys are not mutually exclusive. And I think that's what Peterson does beautifully, is bring them together.
Excellent. Next up is James, followed by Jackie. James, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't understand what the therapeutic element is. If someone is going through a neurotic episode, or having these very complex, family problems or something, or personal problems, is really being honest in communication with a therapist. Is that really the key? I mean, to solving some complex. I mean, Freud was the one who coined the term "the talking cure," and I assume that he was assuming that people were going to be honest, talking about their problems. Now, how is this different from that? Was Freud not very empathetic enough, or?
I think there is an agency required of the therapist in this kind of Rogerian thought that is important, in that, yes, there might be a broken person that is just doing the best to articulate their beliefs, but in this conversation, the therapist is required to bring something to the table, to reflect back what they're hearing, to draw a line when there is one to be drawn. And so there's to tell the truth, and to not sugarcoat it. And so it's a two-part conversation going on here.
So is he making an advance on the original talking cure, or is he kind of like revolutionizing it and bringing in something completely new or different?
I would say it's more Jungian in that it's built off of it. Jung is really a student of Freud's. I think that this is Freud sort of balances between the id and the ego, right? That we all exist between those two forces. In this thought, there's a more it's very independence focused, and sort of the independent individual kind of trying to come to terms with their beliefs and talk it out effectively.
Right.
Next up is Jackie, John, Paul, and Tricia. Jackie, go ahead.
Thank you for such a nice start. I had the privilege of doing some Carl Rogers study at one of an institute in Long Island. And from what I remember, I have my master's in counseling, and this was a part of it. It wasn't just the verbal communication. I remember and practice, it was this presence. I didn't hear you mention too much of Carl Rogers' emphasis on the presence, the non-verbal. Do you see that as part of the communication process? Of course it is, but what's your take on that, and why was that not spoken of?
Yeah, so I think there's an emphasis, especially in this lecture, to the logos, the word, and the power intrinsically in that. But Peterson does talk, it's a lot in 12 Rules, about body language, about just even the impact of having a conversation with someone and what it does to their face. Boom, you read everything from there. And so there's a lot of what Peterson would call, and this goes back to the hierarchy, there's kind of these meta narratives, there's these meta emotions that exist far above the word. And so in having an honest communication, yes, you can have a conversation where no words are spoken, and yet, honest feedback and dialogue is exchanged. So 100% and 10%, it's not just word.
Next up is John. John, go ahead.
Yeah. Great lecture, Claire.
John, can you speak into the mic? You're very faint.
Yeah, sorry. I really enjoyed this lecture, and there's something about Rogerian sort of his approach that's that I'm really drawn to, because it sort of it's more cultivating. It's sort of indirect. So, we have all these problems, all these sort of vicissitudes of life and maladies and things, and he's sort of saying, before you go and try and solve those, maybe you should try to develop the tools to tap into, expressing yourself honestly. And I think there's something really profound about that we sort of tend to get away from. One of the quotes that I found like in the lecture that I found like most interesting was like Peterson says like, I don't know if he's quoting Rogers or maybe not, but like the majority of like psychological issues are basically moral issues. People have trouble reconciling their belief systems with how they act, and that causes disharmony within our being. And I think there's truth to that, and that was sort of my main takeaway was that being true to your authentic self and expressing that is a fundamental component of being a healthy person. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know, we can swallow that and we can pretend it's not there, but it comes in our dreams. It will come back to bite us. Absolutely. And it's not the immoral action, because those will happen. We will act unethically, like, suffering is real. It's not being honest about it and not coming to terms with it.
Next up is Paul.
Yeah, hi, thanks everyone. Thanks, Claire and Shrikant. I have one question. I know more about Rogers than Jordan Peterson, so my question is mostly about him. But my comment about Rogers is, I think that form of therapy got a little bit of a negative reputation in the sense of there was this image of this very nice person just reflecting with a kind smile on their face back to the person everything they said. And it sort of turned into a bit of a satire on therapy, to the other person's point. And these other schools, like there's this fabulous set of tapes, the Gloria tapes. I bet a lot of people know about them, where Carl Rogers did therapy with Gloria, this willing patient, and then Fritz Perls did. And he says to the patient, "You are a phony." And, he's very tough with her. But my point is, these other systems bring out new ways of exposing one's own hypocrisy, if you will, in a way that maybe Rogers didn't. And I wonder if you agree with that, or Jordan Peterson would agree with that. So.
Yeah, I think that Peterson's clinical approach is more intense than what you're articulating. So Peterson talks about when a client comes to see him, he tells the person what he thinks. He doesn't impart advice or tell them what to do, but if they're doing something and he has a reaction to it, he watches it with attention, but he at least gives that person the honest response from one person to the next about what they're like. And often, no one in life is giving us an honest viewpoint or honest mirror of us back to ourselves. So I would say it's more of a harsh approach as you're talking about.
Yeah, and I also want to vote a confidence for Rogers in that, in spite of what I said, the research I think has shown that the rapport, the therapeutic rapport between the therapist and the counselor is the most important thing. It doesn't matter what kind of therapy you do if you have that, in a way. So that's like a giant vote for his method, in my opinion.
Paul, let me follow up on that. You're familiar with Carl Rogers probably more than what I am or Claire is. So talk a little bit about Carl Rogers. What did you learn from him? What did you get from him?
Well, if you watch him in those Gloria tapes, so he does Gloria and then Fritz Perls does, but he's just got this, someone mentioned presence. He's just kind of all about connection. He's got this look in his eye, and Gloria stayed friends with him the rest of her life, whereas she wouldn't go near Fritz Perls. But she also said that Fritz Perls did more for her possibly than Carl Rogers. But he was just, I think what I can say about him is he established a very, very deep, authentic connection that you can't even really describe and teach in a master's program. And it's sort of like Erickson. Once you have a personal genius in the picture like that, other people trying to imitate it could be problematic. But
no, that's excellent.
On him is his personal power, and he did put it into a system, and he did engrave in all of us the importance of establishing that deep, honest therapeutic connection.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul. So kind of following up on what Paul said and Mike said, there are many approaches. Human beings are incredibly complex, and there are many approaches, and some of them work for some people better than others. So, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy may work really well for somebody. What I like about this course by Jordan Peterson is that he's looking at kind of different ways of personality transformation, or even reading a story, kind of looking at a legend can transform you. So there are kind of multiple ways, multiple methods, and some are going to work really well for some people and some not so. And what this course is about is to kind of give you the entire palette, as wide a palette as possible to see different things. The other point that Paul, that you're making that was very good is that typically when somebody discovers something, and I do think that Carl Rogers has discovered something really profound and really important. Further practitioners tend to develop almost a caricatured version of it. And there are obviously going to be people who are going to misinterpret it and all of it. So that's why it's important to go back to the original sources and try to actually see them in their own setting, to say, okay, what are they actually doing? And then take away what you can from that, and then integrate it into your methods of operation as best as you can. Thank you, Paul. Let's see. Next up is Tricia, Pegor, and Aaron. Tricia, go ahead.
Hi. Okay. So I have been chomping at the bit here. So basically, so I'm a therapist. I'm doing at least 1,000 sessions a year. And I just want to clarify. So Carl Rogers, basically the concept is unconditional positive regard. So I think the person before me was basically depicting this like syrupy, sweet, like almost like cancerous mirroring and just warmth and everything like that. But when it's done correctly, it's super effective, giving unconditional positive regard. Number one, where are you really getting that? From anyone in your personal life or family or lovers or friends? And secondly, once you have established that, he was right. The rapport is like nothing anyone could even put in words. It's almost like this sort of other relationship that people have never felt before. And it empowers them, in my experience, to build that sort of honesty, that morality, that sort of integration of what is it that I really believe? How do I use that in my life? So I think the Rogerian thought, that unconditional positive regard, this almost intangible pulling of your best self forward is extremely effective. And you can start there and then integrate other things. But to the question of how is that different than Freudian or any other type of thing, is that other therapies are problem focused. They have a defective lens. That means when you come to the therapist, we're trying to find your problem. Rogerian thought says, you are good and let's make you better. What's making your good self feel uncomfortable? How do we fix that together? So that is my take.
Wow, Tricia, that was amazing. So the other thing I want to make a short comment here is that at a metaphysical level, it's a very different thing. It's basically kind of, it is very religious in this way, if you can call it religious. It is kind of saying, like in India, they have this term namaste. What it means that the God in me greets the God in you. So it is saying that you have a soul, which is very real. You have a spirit, which is very real and which is very valuable, which is very important. Don't forget that. Start from that. Something like that at a very basic metaphysical level as a starting point. Next up is Pegor, Aaron, and John. Pegor, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, as previously mentioned, that at some point in his lectures, Peterson says that as a therapist, you have to sort of tailor the therapy based on the patient that you come across. So some patients respond better to Rogerian therapy, others to Freudian, others to Jungian. So it depends. And so none of the therapists or the therapies have a one size fits all approach, and you have to tailor. And I guess it depends on the difficulties that each patient has. So yeah, that was my point.
Okay, next up is Aaron.
Thank you, Claire, for the presentation, and shout out to our trained psychotherapists that are in the room right now. I really appreciate hearing you guys. One thing I'm thinking about is with the blunt force approach to therapy and so forth. I think I read somewhere that the average person, goes to therapy for like 3 sessions and something really traumatic hits them and then they never come back. So I'm wondering if you start off with that very, very, very blunt force trauma, like you need to get your life in order and get this, and this is what's wrong with you. I think unless you're a super emotionally stable and logical person, you're going to have a really, really, really difficult time hearing that kind of truth just being, whether it's true or not true, just being thrown in your face like that. And I'm wondering if that's what kind of leads into, it's not like weakness or being permissive, but more of a relaxed, like, I'm wondering if some people also do that, or what do you think about that? And like kind of allowing them to kind of problem solve, because I think therapy is a process that's ongoing and it goes on for months and it goes on for years. And it's not that the therapist is afraid to tackle with you on something that might be bothering you and it's very overt. It's just that they realize that if they scare you away too quickly and you don't actually figure out those problems on your own, they might lose you before you actually have that time to grow. And again, not a licensed professional here, so I'm just throwing that out there, and I'm curious to hear what others think about that.
Claire, would you have any comments, or shall we go on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that yeah, we've all been in those situations where you just don't want to go. I mean, it's hard to have honest communication. It's scary. And I think that there's a line here about courage, right? That courage is a prerequisite for empathetic understanding. And so, having the courage to speak honestly and to listen to someone, knowing that it might impact your hierarchy of belief and your morality, it's a dangerous game to play.
Next up is John. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the question of, I guess, and Claire, I appreciate the presentation. I was coming in and out a little bit, but I heard some of it. What you see the purpose, what you would see as the purpose of encounter groups, and how you would contrast that with a traditional Catholic confession.
I'm not familiar with encounter groups. Maybe someone else could answer this. Who is?
Can you describe very briefly what an encounter group is?
I think it's also known as a T group. I'm somewhat familiar with it. Not maybe to the complete understanding, but my understanding is it's in some sense a group therapy session.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know if there was anybody here who had further, not because Rogers I know pioneered in some of this form of therapy, and I didn't know if anybody had some deeper knowledge of it.
Sure. If anybody wants to comment on it, you can just go ahead and unmute and comment on it.
This is Jackie. I did participate in an encounter group called Rogers Style. I have to admit, it was about 25 years ago. And it's interesting that you said the word confessional. I remember feeling very exposed. It was very intense. It definitely wasn't for the lighthearted. It wasn't abusive, like in terms of confrontational, but the pressure to tell the truth, to be transparent, was strongly encouraged, to say the least. They didn't come straight out and say you must, but boy, I felt like something was wrong if I couldn't do it. That was kind of takeaway from that experience. Go right ahead.
So, and did they, and if you don't mind me asking, did they ask you to divulge any sort of sexual history?
Let's do one thing. Let's not go too far into.
You don't have, we don't have to talk
specific-
about the depths of it. I'm just asking.
Let's do one thing. This is kind of Q&A just to clarify points about Rogers. So what we'll do is that we can discuss this in breakout rooms. All right, so let's do that. Next up is going to be Dave, followed by Joel.
Thanks, Shrikant, and great presentation, Claire. I'll speak to groups a little bit. I think some of you are familiar. I work with the divorce recovery group, and we did recovery weekends, and we'd be maybe from 10 to 50 people participating, and we would break up into small groups. You know, it's how good small groups are. But I would facilitate often, and we actually, in fact, I was trainer for a while. We trained the Carl Rogers quotation that I, as a psychologist, I cannot cure the patient. I can teach him and he will cure himself. But the other thing about working with the group, and I know we talked about empathy, and empathy is important because I think that was one thing Rogers was talking about, is seeing the situation from the other person's point of view. He mentioned the woman who had killed her 2 children so her boyfriend didn't want to have kids. It's very serious to try to understand what was going on in her mind. But the other thing about working with the group, because empathy is important, but we were taught even more important than the empathy saying, oh, I know how you feel, and oh, I would have done the same thing. And no, the most important thing is to just listen, to being a caring listener. And I think another person said the unconditional positive regard, because so many of us, especially with this virus, we're living by ourselves, we're trapped, we feel alone in the world, we feel like no one cares. Maybe even a family, in a relationship, or even a marriage, it may be entirely superficial, but have someone that's really listening, that you know cares about you. It's so, so powerful. These people came in Friday night, they were mostly zombies, and they left singing and happy and laughing after 3 days. It's transformational. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Next up is Joel. Joel, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Claire and Igor. It was a great presentation. I just wanted to kind of focus on a couple of small things. Igor mentioned that the type of treatment or therapy or interaction would depend on the needs of the patient, but that may not be as valuable as an observation as it appears on the surface, because the therapist may not have every treatment modality available to him or her. So while there might be some objective way of finding that Rogerian therapy would be better than Jungian therapy, the therapist is only trained as a Freudian, so what difference does it make? And the other thing is that, sorry, Claire, did you want to comment on that? Sorry.
Yeah, I think just the response there quickly, we can do this 2 and 2, is it's temperament based. So in understanding kind of proclivities on the big 5 or by someone's temperament, you would have at least a few different avenues ready for you. So I would hope that someone would have more than Freud. Sounds like some of our folks here certainly do.
Yeah, no doubt. But to give you an example, I recently found a Meetup group on Myers-Briggs type, something that I had done a lot of work on many, many years ago. And I'm quite familiar with the theory, the introverted, extroverted intuition, all that stuff. And this was a group of younger people, but because I can now appreciate this from the distance of 30 or 40 years, I could see that the life stage that they were in, and I could see a reflection of myself 30 or 40 years ago, that there were other issues that I was unable to bring to their attention. And even if I could see them, I didn't have a way, or maybe I just didn't have the skill to be able to explain that to them. Anyway, that's probably too much from me, but thank you for listening.
Thank you, Joel. All right, let's go ahead and go for the second part of the presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions again, and then we'll do breakout rooms. Claire, take it away.
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna see if I can whiz through this because I really want to open it up to all these brilliant minds in the room. Okay, so as we talked about, humans, a basic tenet here is that humans are inherently good, right? And that evil, in contrast, is the absence of good. And in this way, people really have a strong intrinsic tendency toward good, and that's why we want to treat them with that unconditional positive regard, as we said. That being said, the client has to come in wanting to change, right? So this is step one, acknowledging the problem. You cannot impose anything on other people unless they want to be better. If the student doesn't want to learn things, if they're not seeing things that are relevant to them, they will not remember it. And so that's a really important kind of presupposition here. This idea of humans as inherently good, it's also a precondition in relationships. And Peterson's going to talk a lot about relationships in this second section. So if you're in a relationship, and really if you're in any relationship with another person in the world, you need to go in understanding that you are flawed, and so is the partner. You have to listen, and you might even need to help others listen and help others criticize you and articulate their feelings. Peterson says, you will never win an argument with a romantic partner, ever. And it's because you're not playing that argument. You're not playing the battle. You're playing many, many, many arguments throughout the extent of your life together as you come to understand each other. And so winning in that way, it's really a rationalization argument in which you don't have to change. You don't have to listen. And in contrast, Rogers is encouraging us to lean into that conflict by thinking. Peterson says that thinking is a form of war. It's a war that's going on in the interior, but one that we need to kind of bring to the exterior through our words rather than picking up our fists. We mentioned this, we did this. So the classic relationship example here is you're having a discussion with your partner about who to cook dinner. And so, of course, Peterson throws in a few gender roles things here that this is a tougher conversation to have now more than ever. But it's not, it seems like a simple conversation, who's going to cook dinner, but it's a lot to really wrestle with, right? Who likes to cook? How often should we go out to eat? What do we like to cook? Who pays? Does the person who is eating appreciate the food that is being served? And how can we kind of make this basic idea of eating kind of serve a much higher order? And so Peterson is encouraging us in this situation where, who's going to cook the meals for the rest of our life, instead to orient ourselves through communication with our families and through the people that we are loved ones to reach temporary conclusions and then iterate, to bow down to just the need to reach a conclusion and have an honest conversation, and then iterate, run it for a couple weeks, see how you like dinner, see how you should switch it up. But rather than just sort of blindly taking one task and just living in resentment for decades, having honest conversations about something that as simple as dinner. I think that we hit this. I mentioned independence. So another presupposition here is that that the individual wants to be independent, right? And that, there's this inherent human value to individuals. And so, if you're speaking honestly for Rogers, it means you're speaking with an element of independence that is well suited for your therapy. You're speaking with yourself, the integrated self. And that's really kind of where he wants us to exist. Rogers encourages a laboratory experiment, which we've definitely talked about before, which is in any conversation, especially in arguments and discussions, when having that back and forth exchange, rather than listening and just throwing something back, and then while the other person is talking, you're thinking about what you can say next that'll make you better and sound better, but rather in that exchange, when person A speaks, person B restates what they heard person A say in the best manner possible. Person A tweaks it based on whether they thought it was right or not, and then it goes back and forth. And what this allows us to do is, like, our communication is broken. Our understandings of ourselves and others is so broken. And so often what's going on in these conversations is we're not really getting our points across. And so this experimental method of communicating and re-saying what you're hearing is a really great, I think, anecdote that we can all use in our lives to listen a little bit better. We would never get through a Peterson lecture without mentioning Dostoevsky. And so he brings up once again Raskolnikov, which is kind of his favorite evil figure in all of fiction. And this is an individual in this novel who kind of has every reason to be immoral. So he wants to go to law school. He doesn't have any money. His sister is going to go, like, marry some awful rich man so that he can go to law school. He's living in this awful like boarding house with an evil dictator woman who has a slave for a niece, and she is just absolutely awful. And he says, well, hey, why don't I kill two birds with one stone, kill this woman, take her money, and then I can get to go to law school. And so in this book, and what Dostoevsky does so beautifully is he paints these evil figures as the torn humans that they are. This character has every reason to murder someone. And this is how he really encourages us to look at the evil figures in our lives, not as just blanket evil, but as good, good, a little less good, right? And so this kind of empathy for humans' capacity for evil and suffering is really what he wants us to be grounded in. Courage, we hit courage. We really sailed through this in the questions. We hit the guy that was trying to kill someone. So I will leave us then with a quote, and then we'll move on to some discussion here. So in conclusion, this tendency to react in any emotionally meaningful statement by forming an evaluation of it from our own point of view is, I repeat, the major barrier to interpersonal communication. But is there any way of solving this problem, of avoiding the barrier? I feel that we're making exciting progress toward this goal, and I would like to present it as simply as I can. Real communication occurs, and this evaluated tendency is avoided when we listen with understanding. What does this mean? It means to see the expressed idea and attitude from the other person's point of view, to sense how it feels to him, to achieve his frame of reference in regard to the thing he is talking about. Stated so briefly, this may sound absurdly simple, but it is not. It is an approach which we have found extremely potent in the field of psychotherapy. It is the most effective agent we know for altering the basic personality structure of the individual and improving his relationships and his communications with others. If he can listen to what he can tell me, if I can understand how it seems to him, if I can see its personal meaning for him, if I can sense the emotional flavor for which it has for him, then I will be relieving potent forces of change in him. And I'll post
Excellent. Claire, so I want to hear a lot from everybody, but the best way to do that for this topic is to now do breakout rooms. Welcome back, folks. All right, so Claire, what I want to do is I really want to hear from people, and I will try to let us both try to take notes of what people are saying and see what people are saying and try to put it together and then do a discussion after that. So folks, try to be brief, try to cover what you want to say in possibly 1 minute, 2 minutes is tops. Try to make just very few points, only the most important points you want to make. What are your takeaways? What are you walking away with? What did you learn from Authentic Relating or Carl Rogers? What is this personality series doing for you? You can choose anything, but try to be brief. All right, I'm going to call on people in the order in which I see them, and we'll go from there. So the first one is going to be Paul, Victor, and John. Paul, go ahead.
Okay, I'm kind of like thrown off by that last session, but in a good way, good people with a deep dialogue. I'll just go back to what I was thinking about before the session, breakout rooms, so I can talk without wasting your time. I think that I'm coming away from this with my sort of reframe on Carl Rogers and my own thinking that it's necessary but not sufficient. Like he laid this incredible groundwork for all people and all therapists with authentic communication and positive regard. And that's the base upon which you build. And then you can apply other therapies. So that's my thought.
Okay, that's great. So, you know, Carl Rogers says base, but what else is needed? Okay, what else is needed? Okay, I'll put it that way. Next up is Victor, John, and Aaron. Victor, go ahead.
Hey guys, well, thank you for this time. Actually, this is my first meetup for this particular topic, although I've been attending a few of 50 Living Ideas. So it's been amazing, and I was actually looking forward to this this particular meetup because of Jordan Peterson. I have some introduction to his work, and last year we did another meetup where we discussed his book, which is his earlier book. It's Maps of Meaning. It was quite educational for me. I went through the book a couple of times, and it's really dense, and it took me a while to, of course, I wouldn't say that I totally understand it yet, but it's an amazing content, and this meetup and Claire's presentation, it actually is opening up. It's unpacking his ideas, and which is really helpful for me. And I'm totally looking forward to attend more of these.
Well, thank you, Victor. I'm pleased. I just wanted to announce to everybody that we are going to start off a 13-part series on Maps of Meaning, starting 3 Thursdays from now on 19th of November. Roger and Claire will be leading that. What we'll be doing is that, and I invite you to get the book. And what we'll do next time is that I'm going to talk to you about how to read Maps of Meaning. It's actually a book really, I mean, people keep claiming it's a dense book, but it's actually the most well-organized book that I've seen. Okay, so I want to introduce that to you. So if that is his masterpiece, if you like Jordan Peterson, that is the foundation of his thought. 12 rules, his lectures kind of are applying some of those insights. He does a good job of applying them, but the core concepts are all there in Maps of Meaning. Now, Roger has been really immersed in Maps of Meaning for a long time, and we hit it off very well first time we interacted with one another because both of us love that. It is very deeply Jungian, so it's a great book. So I would recommend that you get it and start reading it with us. I will also tell you that we are going to allow people to cheat. Okay, what we are going to do is that we are going to, for each of those sections, there is a video, only a 28-minute video, which summarizes the concept that we'll be discussing every time. So this is a special series. See, it's very difficult for Jordan Peterson to say anything in shorter time than 1 hour and 40 minutes. I did not know that it was possible, but there was a series that was done on one of the TVs where he had only 28 minutes and he did it. So that's the series we are going to use. So there will be a video. So if you can't read the book, you can watch the video. I recommend that you read the book, but otherwise you can watch the video. And we're going to summarize it anyway. So if you miss everything, you'll still be able to get it. So that's going to start starting 19th of November. All right. So that's what is coming up. So next up is John, Aaron, and Jean. John, go ahead. John
Yeah.
P. Yeah.
Yes. I just wanted to go back previously about I honestly I just do want a genuine answer to my question about the nature of Roger's thought with regards to encounter groups. I mean,
Sure. I'll put that as a question. I don't know if anybody can answer it. So what we're trying to do is that we're trying to put everybody's thought together. We have limited capacity of answering questions, but we will try to get to that. Okay.
Okay. Well, okay. And and there's something else I just want to talk about. I mean,
sure.
I've heard some critiques about it, and I want to understand what's the intense aspect of it. My other question is with regards to honest communication. I mean, it sounds good. I mean, who wouldn't want honest communication? But then there's also the concept of boundaries, and boundaries are important. The stuff that you would say to a partner is going to be different than a coworker, is going to be different from a stranger. And although I'm not going to say that I'm an expert on Roger's thought, it's my understanding that when he speaks of honesty, he talks about going and kind of breaking down these natural boundaries that a lot of people may see as healthy. What is the nature of having all people in a group, divulging personal details about themselves and then using peer pressure in order to get other people to divulge similar details. So maybe my understanding of his method with that regard is wrong, but that's what I want.
So I'm going to formulate that. I don't know whether we'll be able to get to encounter groups. That's a very specific question which requires specific base of knowledge. But this question, I think the question of what about boundaries? What is the relationship between authentic relating and boundaries? So we'll definitely put that in. And we have the question initially from Paul. So we got Paul and we got John here. All right. Next up is Aaron. Aaron, what are your observations?
Yeah, just hearing from the other licensed therapists and stuff like that, I began scratching my head and saying to myself, well, geez, psychologists are not a monolith block. I would actually like to hear what some other psychoanalysts have to think. Like, do some of them out there in the field disagree with Jordan Peterson, or do they perhaps have a different model of curing patients? And I think having people that have like 10, 15, 20 years of experience in an office setting might be able to shed some light on what theories they've found that are really useful and what theories maybe just don't work. And I think having real life experience is really the only way to know, do these theories hold muster? So I know that would probably be hard to arrange, but if possible, I would love to have, another meetup or a group about some of the other diverse thoughts into psychotherapy.
I mean, the one thing that is starting out, again, this is something that's going to be of interest to everybody. On starting November 15th, Sunday, we're starting a new series called Practical Jung, where we're going to get a number of Jungian psychoanalysts talking about how you can actually apply Carl Jung's ideas to your life. So that's a series coming up, and Carl Jung is the biggest influence on Jordan Peterson, and we look forward to kind of delving into that a great deal. And we will keep picking other approaches to psychotherapy as we go on. Okay, but ideally, what we'd like to do is that we like to spend time kind of diving into each of them to get enough instead of just getting kind of a surface thing. So that's what. But thank you very much, Aaron. Next up is Victor. Let me see who else. Victor, Pegor, and Marisa. Victor, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Shrikant.
Oh, Victor. Oh, sorry. Okay. I already called on you. Sorry about that. Next up is Pegor, because what happens is that in Zoom, people keep moving around. So I lose track sometimes. Okay, it's going to be Pegor, Marisa, and Jonathan. Pegor, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you to Claire and you for today's presentation. I would just like to point out that for me, what sort of stuck out from the whole video and the discussion was the importance of the sort of unconditional positive regard and honest communication in personal relationships, especially with your partners. I think that's for me what sort of was more important than its applications in therapy. Not to say that it's not to diminish its applications in therapy. It's just for me personally, that's what was more useful. Thank you.
No, excellent. Tricia made that point, and I think she was exactly on point there. That is the heart. Next up is Marisa, Jonathan, and Stefan.
At my breakout room, it was, our conversation brought to mind for me the concept of congruence. I don't recall if Peterson brings that up specifically in this video, but it's the concept of the beauty of what we say matching how we act. And as several here have mentioned, the concept of, this unconditional acceptance, as it were. I feel like when that statement is said, the image that is presented is one of an outward focus to the individual sitting across from us. But to me, I find, especially, in the discussion, in my discussion group, we were talking about, how people are, this social norm dictates that one should behave in a certain nice manner. And so in my mind, I view that the concept of unconditional acceptance, maybe we need to try, or maybe the encouragement here is to turn that inward towards ourselves. And if we call ourselves to task in such that every time we speak, we strive to accept what we view as truth unconditionally, well, then that's already half the battle there. So Peterson tells us to, in a different one of his rules, he says, speak with purpose. And I feel like it's necessary it's kind of like some of these concepts cannot live by themselves. They have to coexist. But the neat thing is, in following one, you kind of accidentally find yourself deep in the midst of practicing another. And I find just the symmetry of that to be just amazingly beautiful. And I feel that that's kind of the heart of what we're discussing here today. Thank you.
Beautiful. That was amazing. Yeah, thank you. Next up is John, Stefan, and William. John, go ahead.
Well, thank you. Again, excellent presentation, Claire, and really enjoying the comments and insights from both the licensed therapists and the people who are, I assume, aren't licensed therapists, but could be if they wanted to be. And my something came out in the breakout room which I think we just touched on, was sort of interesting, which is this idea of being too vulnerable, right? So like if we take this to its natural extreme, we're going to be going through everybody we see on the street. We're going to, and there's certain situations where we can't be that, like especially certain working environments, like they won't survive, or they feel deeply that they won't survive because, let's say, a cutthroat business environment, you can't sort of have positive regard. There's sort of like and that raises the question, like, maybe these maladies we're experiencing are some symptom of modern society sort of contorting the way we relate to each other. Maybe not. But maybe a lot of this, what we consider to be psychological issues with that stem from us not being able to express our authentic truth or be in line with our authentic truth, is just the structures that our modern society has created that lead to a sort of anemic set of relationships, if that's the right word, and we're sort of deprived of what humanity in its more natural state, if there ever was such a thing, had a more natural balance of. And so I'm just sort of thinking about that in terms of this psychology. It seems like this psychology is really just a way to get us back in tune with that, what would otherwise be natural.
All right, let me quickly summarize all the points so far. So Paul and Aaron Paul is saying that this is a great base, but what else is needed? Aaron is saying, what are the other approaches? So there's one kind. Then Pagor is pointing out that unconditional positive regard is the heart of it. And Marisa is talking about, if you start from yourself, then it kind of integrates with many, many other things. John is pointing out the modern society and authentic relating. And the other John with the H is talking about, are there any boundaries to authentic relating? So these are the points on the table so far. So next up is going to be Stefan, William, and Vyom. Stefan, go ahead.
Yes, hi. So I was thinking about what John mentioned about boundaries, and I think sometimes it's good. It's a good thing to gently, minorly infringe on people's boundaries just a bit, because if everybody's just kind of distant from each other, you're never going to get to that heart of what connects us to each other and get to the heart of truth, and everything's going to be honestly kind of boring. So I think I found in my experience, if I say something that might come across as a bit boundary crossing, I find if I just look them in the eye and I make sure I have a bit of a soft inflection, it works every time. Like they can sense that you're not coming from a bad place, and the eye contact is a major component of that. So yeah, I would recommend that. And then, yeah, I'm just going to repeat myself.
Excellent. Thank you, Stefan. Great observation. Next up is William, Vyom, and Hiro. William, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Great presentation. I think the key point that was made tonight was about honest communication in relationships. But what about honest communication with ourselves? Honest communication with ourselves. Peterson mentions that briefly, but I think that's just important. What about the stories we tell ourselves, the narrative that runs in our minds all day long, the voices we hear? Is it honest? Is it true? Or is it too positive, too negative, maybe too limiting? So I've been thinking a lot about honest communication to myself and the importance of that. Thank you.
Beautiful. That's great. That's amazing. Next up is Vyom, Hiro, and Joe. Vyom, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry about that. I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. All right. So I think this is a great talk. I think the few things which for me to take away is, I think the first part is, while I truly understand the idea of starting from being good, I think that's a very important part of, starting with looking at the goodness of a person. I think that was a recurring theme both for Peterson as well as both for Peterson and other. So I truly understand that part. And I think one of the things that we had in the breakout group was about how we need to completely paraphrase, talk, before we make somebody listen to us, we need to completely listen to them. That was something that came up in our group that Judith brought up. And I think that's a very interesting thing, which I haven't thought about. I know about a good conversation means about paraphrasing, and I do a bad job at it, but a complete paraphrase is very interesting as a thought process, especially when people are not listening to you. So that's a good takeaway for me for this.
Thank you. Thank you, Vyom. Next up is Hiro, Joe, and Dave. Hiro, go ahead.
Hello.
Um, I find this interesting. I didn't quite catch the beginning, or I was pretty distracted, but then I started catching some interesting bits about that Carl Rogers focused on a particular patient, Gloria. So I went into YouTube and started watching Carl Rogers explain what he's trying to do with Gloria. And it does sound that he's trying to, that he's in hoping that by getting in touch with everything about the patient, then it's hope that maybe that increases a love for the self of the patient, or maybe build confidence in the patient to have conversations with itself and work things out, something like that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jairo. Next up is Joe, Dave, and Jean. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, Claire, for presenting again. It was fantastic. And I just also, want to express my gratitude towards Trisha as well, who was in our breakout room, who also just could bill us for a therapy session. So legitimately. But I think the major takeaway that I walk away with is, and I think Maritza actually really hit on it, is the idea of how we interact with ourselves and it creates space for others. And I think this comes back to another theme that we've seen over the past few weeks, and that is like confronting dragons, and the idea of how we, you have to accept yourself and confront your dragons, and then that creates space for others, and that also dictates how we can, accept others into our lives. So I think that the idea of self-acceptance is really critical. And I also, I think that idea of, again, I'm not going to go on too long about it because I think Maritza actually captured it quite well.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Dave. Dave, go ahead.
Claire, thanks again for a good presentation. And Shrikant, I want to give you a compliment because I think you're running this 52 Living Ideas with a lot of Rogers ideas, giving everyone an opportunity to speak, and we all listen respectfully. And we are urged to disagree, but not be disagreeable. And I think that's formulated something very, very valuable. And I think that's why we all return. In fact, I've commented to friends, I think I'm an addict because I love the mental stimulation that I get here. So I just say, keep up the good work. It's very, very fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, absolutely. This, Carl Rogers, this approach of kind of honest communication, whether through Carl Rogers or Jordan Peterson or Ray Dalio, has been a core of our New York meetup. So we kind of started out, and I've seen what this kind of dialogue does for me and for others. Absolutely. And it's wonderful to have all these amazing people back and sharing at this level. Next up is Jean, Brian, and Jyoti.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited that we're going to have the meta meeting. I got the book and I'm looking forward to the new session. So this, the honest communication, we had a great subgroup discussion. And my takeout from this is like, we really need to do the honest communication, but also with some kind of boundary. Because I realized, only with this group and also my previous landmark group, when people are ready to do that, you can really have deeper conversation. But in most of our social setting, for whatever reason, I was complaining to my group, like I have a group of people, they're just talking about shoes and, like coloring their hairs and like all this boring stuff. Like, why people wasting their time talking about this? So it's like, and I think, and also after the landmark training, I try to have this honest communication with my mom about when I grew up, how she was working and not like focus on kids, and she didn't take it very well. But anyway, I realized, you know, like somebody said earlier, the order and chaos, the boundary between that is where the growth point. I think when we try to have honest communication with people, we cannot just attack them to the core. We have to find that edge and gradually, you know, get into it. So that's the point we can grow a little bit. So we cannot like overwhelm them so they scared away. So I think that's what I might take out.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jean. Really appreciate that. Next up is Brian, Jyoti, and Tricia. Brian, go ahead.
Okay, great presentation and a really wild Q&A session. I enjoyed the evening very much. Unfortunately, I don't know a great deal about the subject, so I don't think I got as much as I could out of it. And I didn't this week find time to look at the videos, so I have that to do again with the ones from yesterday. But yeah, a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Jyoti, Tricia, and Judith.
Yeah, hi, Clara. Once again, you did a great job in explaining Rogerian theory. And I agree with Dave about Shrikant. I came here very reluctantly, but looking at Shrikant's attitude, I felt very encouraged. So you are doing good, Shrikant. Now, the other thing that I'm going to tell you, Claire, that you are also a very empathetic person. I did tell my daughter that in the breakout room, you had tears in your eyes when I told you things that I told you. So thank you for that. And you kind of made me feel very good. And the other thing that I was going to tell you was, in my last life, I used to do developmental counseling here and there for the high school students. And I had a heavy classwork from Rogerian therapy. So I used some of his techniques. And I'll go back to saying what I said to you earlier. Although Rogerian therapy has all the necessary ingredients for a good therapy, however, when a person is showing maladaptive behaviors, honesty does not work. It is like they become very suspicious why the therapist is so honest and so accepting of me that they get turned off. You understand the point I'm making? It goes in the other direction. But for a person like me, I think this is great, this kind of a therapy, because I volunteer information, I'm very honest, I'm looking for somebody to validate me. So that will work. And for average people, it works beautifully. But when the ability of the other client is not known, it's or below average, it's difficult to make it move.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Next up is going to be Tricia, Judith, and Joel. Tricia, go ahead.
Yes. So I guess just because my name came up so much, I actually just want to say thank you so much for everyone providing an opportunity to be open and honest and speaking. As a therapist, I'm always sort of taking in, and there's not often and always opportunities for me to express myself. And I'm very expressive. And the fact that you guys are providing an open and accepting space for all of our thoughts and feelings, it is just so beautiful and so meaningful, and I'm just so grateful. So thank you. I'm feeling the love.
Tricia, wonderful. And I think your observations were fantastic. And, the people in your breakout room had amazing things to say. And Tricia, the thing is that we are always looking for talking about many things. So if you have any ideas that you would like to talk about, if you wanted to do a full meetup on something, just let me know. I would be delighted to have you lead a meetup, okay?
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Judith. Joel and Kevin. Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to thank you and Claire too, because I thought she did an amazing job of just going over everything that I watched and made it really so understandable. So the things that I think it's really valuable because it's something every single person can use because they interact with people in their lives every day. So I really enjoy this topic, and I think that if we take it to heart, we can grow and be better people in our relationships, through this medium. So I appreciate that. The thing that kept coming up even with these comments here was the boundaries thing, which came up a little bit in our discussion group. Basically, the way I see it, like work and personal boundaries, right? I feel it's possible to use these methods or this approach of speaking your truth and I think and the trust. Those are the takeaways I got, that you need to trust that the other individual has a perception that's one aspect of reality, and that if it doesn't match your own, doesn't mean it's not a valid perception of the reality. So if you leave that opening, then you make yourself vulnerable that you could be wrong or whatever, but that you have to start with that when you communicate, I feel. And I think that's what he was saying. And I think if you give that opening, then you're more likely to get it back. But a lot of times, a lot of us are so worried about protecting our egos, we don't allow that to the other person, and then it just builds a wall between. So somebody's got to let it down. And I think you can do this in your work environment and remain professional. There's a professional type of topic you might talk about, things you might talk about or whatever, but in the professional environment. But I think it's still possible. I think it's something we should strive for, but it's not easy. But I think it's a good thing to always have in mind. And then that somebody also mentioned, being self-truthful, and how do you do that? That is hard too. You can't do it by yourself, which is why you need to leave that opening for somebody to be able to show their point of view, see that point of view, be able to be in their position, and then maybe see how they're perceiving you. And then you begin to understand your own truth a little better.
Excellent point, Judith. Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Joel, Chachi and Niece, and Kevin. Joel, go ahead.
Thanks, Shrikant, Claire, Prigor, and others. I think what resonates most for me is this issue of boundaries that didn't get discussed in our meetup group, but I think John raised it here first, and Stefan echoed it, and others as well. And I think that's really the issue. How do we approach these boundaries, and how do we probe them and test whether these things are really viable or doable, and should we? What is our role, and what is our duty to people in terms of the context of our relationships with them? In fact, maybe we have a duty not to probe the borders. There may be sensitivities which we can't understand. And I guess that's the big takeaway for me. And I'm really pleased my mom let me stay up beyond 11 o'clock tonight.
Your mom is very nice. Next up is going to be Chachi. Chachi, go ahead.
I guess I'm just thinking about a couple things that Claire said when she started out saying that one of Roger's sayings was to tell the truth, or at least don't lie, and also how we say something and mean something else, which could be the definition of a lie, or maybe not. And but I always think about that. I always wonder when I say something if what I'm talking about because sometimes you don't know what you're talking about until you say it, and then you have to hear yourself and correct yourself. And which is why I think it's sometimes entertaining to listen to Jordan Peterson, because he thinks out loud. And I also think that what he said about assuming the other person knows something that you don't, it's just a beautiful thing to think. And so I'm just happy to hear that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. Next up is Mike. Let's see, Mike, Kevin, and anybody else who wants to speak can go ahead and type an exclamation mark if I have missed you by mistake. Mike, go ahead.
Okay. My takeaway from this, rephrasing something that several of you have said, Claire in particular, that this is a variant of physician heal thyself. The best therapists aren't physicians or therapists, they're facilitators so that you can be the physician to heal yourself, and they guide you in that direction. And now, along those lines, and this I got from Kahneman and Tversky, they talk about, besides System 1 and System 2 thinking, that everybody is exactly where they supposed to be, consistent with their grasp of reality and their belief system. Now, it's virtually impossible to reprogram that belief system. So the challenge of the therapist is to gently nudge the patient to be a physician to surgically change their belief system. And I see that in the examples of Carl Rogers. I see that in Seligman's stuff and the Gloria papers that Paul talked about.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Great observation. I like the term nudge. I think we'll talk about it in the context of boundaries. Next up is going to be Kevin and Mamta. Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Claire, for the inspiration talk and other people sharing. And honest conversation has to be a mutual way from the two party or multiple party. The first start should be innerly communication with yourself. They should know yourself, then evaluate what you know about yourself, the truth you believe in, possibly different than other people. When you talk to other people, you have to consider that your family, your workplace, your boss, your colleague, or other religion people. So then build a trust, then possible lead to meaningful conversation. That's my takeaway. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mamta, did you listen to the listen to the presentation?
I did not listen to
Okay.
the presentation, but I got it. It's about honesty and authenticity. And I am an honest person and nobody messes with me because that's the true thing. It's like they know, not to, I will get it. Or otherwise, if the person doesn't know me, I know the person is gaslighting. Then one thing I want to say about the conversation. So I don't have honest people around me. Earlier, they were not much honest people. So I ended up writing a book, An Ostrich Feather, which was my story, like, how to learn to lie, because I wanted to lie at least once. And I tried, whenever I tried as a teenager and in the childhood, it would come true. So that I became very fearful of that. And now as a writer, it's a blessing. And when I want to ask any question, I just write it down and I get the answer. So that's the honest conversation I have. But now I guess on my way, I will find few honest people also, which I have started getting.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mamta. So here is what I've come up with, Claire. So this is everything, kind of summary of everything. So I want to first put it in terms of how it was said. No, let me just give you the structure. So one thing I see here, so I'm trying to kind of summarize everything here, okay? It's a difficult thing. This is such a rich material, rich number of points that have been put forth, but I'm going to try my best. One of the points is about yourself, because fundamentally it is about how you view yourself, whether you're honest with yourself, whether you're paying attention to yourself, whether you're being true to yourself. It's kind of starts with you. So this is a point that Maritza made in her own way, Joe made in his own way, William made in his own way. So I think that's one kind of starting point. So, or Mike made, saying that heal thyself. And this is core to Carl Rogers. So basically, we heal ourselves. If we don't heal ourselves, we don't get healed. The other people can be catalysts, they can help, but ultimately it has to come from you. The negative part of it is that if a person is not ready to do that, Jean pointed out, there are many people who are not ready to do that. Jyoti pointed out that there are many people who are coming from a place where they are not ready to do that. Then maybe we can't, if that's not possible, if they don't put something in, it's difficult. So that is one thing. You have to kind of start from yourself. That was one point. The second, in terms of your impact on others when you're doing that, is that if you are open, then the other person also opens up. So there is a kind of, the other person has the confidence. It's part of kind of mirroring. You have to take the first step. That's the power of listening. Just by simply listening to the other person, you are inviting them to be more open. And you can't really do that unless you are doing that with yourself. But if you are doing that with yourself, if you are being open, then the other people react. I have found definitely that other people react to that. So even in the midst of the social game that Jonathan talked about, there are all kinds of social conventions where people are essentially, wearing masks, and they're kind of going through the routines, going through the steps, which really don't mean anything to any of the parties involved. Even in the midst of that, when somebody is genuine, other people will react. Other people will not react, but other people will do something similar, and they will reciprocate that. So that was one point. Again, following up on what Jonathan said and what John said, there are social norms where there is kind of the social norms which lay down boundaries of all kinds. And there are individual people who have their own kind of artificial boundaries. Some of the boundaries are legitimate, some of them are not. Some of the boundaries are shaped by the kind of relationship, the kind of interaction that you're going through. Some of them are just because people are habitually have it. There is no reason. And what do you do about that? So I think what Stefan talked about and what Mike talked about, Stefan talked about kind of taking, pushing it a little bit, doing it in a very empathic way, but stepping across the boundary a little bit. Or Mike talked about terms that Daniel Kahneman and others have used, nudging. That's what the therapist does. They nudge. So on one hand, you're kind of connecting. On the other hand, you are giving them space in which they can grow into. They can discover something new. And both those things are necessary. So these are some of the points that this is the structure. So it's like others, there are social norms, and there are boundaries. And then there is, of course, the points that Paul brought up and Aaron brought up about, yes, this is valuable, but what else is there in addition to what other toolkits are there in addition to that? What I would like to do is that I would like to keep that aside for now, because let's first deal with these issues. And the question of boundaries keeps coming up because in some fundamental way, this is all about kind of starting, going at a very deep level and dissolving some of the boundaries. This is what it is, all about. But then the question of, what boundaries are real, what are artificial, what need to be respected, and what need to be pushed against. And I think that's the most interesting thing that I get. So that's what I got from it, Claire. What did you get?
Yeah, the boundaries was, I think, the biggest highlight that I think kept coming up. And I think, this centering on ourself is really important. It all starts within, but I definitely want to talk about boundaries.
Okay, so then let's just discuss boundaries, because that's really the heart of the issue. Because I think all of us are agreed on the kind of that you have to act from within your core. Mm-hmm. All of us are agreed that it is worth, at least in some context, to connect deeply with other human beings. And then the question comes, what are the boundaries and where? So I'm going to again now open the discussion only on the topic of boundaries. Okay. And you can talk. So that is the boundary of what we're talking about. But within that, you can make any points. So I'm going to open it up. So you can go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you have any comments about boundaries. Okay, Tricia, you're first. Go ahead.
So I was very interested how many times that came up today, because I think what is happening is and what I've experienced is when you start dealing with unconditional positive regard and honesty in this culture, it's almost like, oh, no, something is wrong. This is not right. This can't be right. Oh, I need boundaries. And we're not talking about like the healthy boundaries. We're talking about defensive walls. Like, no, I am under attack. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate. And I've experienced it even with my therapist. I like ghosted my therapist because it was just too positive. Mm-hmm. And now I'm back, thank God. But basically, that feeling of almost like, wait, did we break the system? And in a way, yes, you did. In a culture that is dehumanizing and materialistic and just not affirming of our deeper selves, when we are met with the concept of true openness and honesty, I think we have no choice but to want to defend ourselves. So then from there, after that initial shock, then you can get into the more healthy boundaries. So I find that interesting.
Wonderful. That was amazing, Tricia. Thank you. Thank you so much. Next up is Joe, Jean, Chachi, Aaron, and Stefan. Joe, go ahead.
I think it actually has a lot to do with our trauma patterns in the past. That's how we set our boundaries. Essentially, how badly we've been hurt will ultimately dictate how open we can be, or how we confront those past traumas. And our willingness to confront those past traumas will absolutely dictate how we can interact with others. I know that part of the video where I had to stop, where I just didn't have time, was the idea of talking about how sociopaths are part of the, culture. And, that ultimately dictates how, if we run into those people, then we're not going to be open, and our boundaries are going to be very high, or, we're going to set up these very high defense mechanisms. And I think actually what Tricia was just alluding to, in a culture that is only, kind of worried about themselves and not necessarily focused on ethical and authentic interaction, that's going to create a natural boundary that we, for ourselves, that we automatically have a way of responding in a defensive manner. So I think, again, it matters about the types of interactions that we have, how high our boundaries actually are, to the extent of our boundaries. And that allows us, because we'll be much more authentic and open if we've never really been violated, if that trust has not been violated.
Excellent. I think both these points are great. The point that it is cultural, partly it is cultural and partly it is individual experience. You can find that these boundaries are different from culture to culture. You go to another culture, they have boundaries, but they have different boundaries. And you go from person to person, also there is difference. So there is a history, individual history, and then there is a kind of cultural history.
That's why system 4 is actually a really meaningful in your 4-system model with the family and where the culture is aspect.
Thank you. Next up is Jean, Chachi, Aaron, Stefan, Claire, Kevin, Maritza, and Paul. Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually talked with our group. I think a lot of this is very cultural. I think you will find actually, maybe it's kind of like civilized. Some kind of civilization is like you don't show your emotion. You're more educated. You don't really, you have this, I think that's maybe part of American culture, because it's interesting. We were talking about in the PTSA meeting, like the American school, they said, oh, everybody's great, wonderful job, all this. And then they have the French school, and the parents were like, this is terrible, this is bad. So it's such a great contrast, So, and even in school, I think the problem is like, we try to protect everybody to not be hurt. And in the end, everybody's so easily to be hurt. So they cannot listen to anything negative because you're so well protected. For the kids as well, now you cannot invite anybody to your birthday party if you don't invite everybody in the class. They don't want anybody left out. And I heard somebody mention that that's not authentic relationship between kids because they have their preference. So I think the culture now, even in school, they reinforce it. It's not really honest or authentic relationship.
Thank you, Jean. Next up is Chachi, followed by Aaron. Chachi.
When I think of boundaries, I guess I think of being accused that I don't have any. And I think it was in the context of between people. I think I know that the truth can hurt, and I think we can hurt each other with words, but I think if you can cut one person out of your life for any kind of a reason, it means you can cut out everybody from your life for a lot of reasons. And I don't think people are meant to be alone. And if you're just looking for reasons to cut, then they're easily found. And I think it's a lot harder to find ways to weave things back together, and because that takes two. And I think that's pretty much how you make a fabric of society. Everybody has to be knitted together, and I think it's really hard to keep that together sometimes. But it starts with just two, and we just have to. If we can just have one person that you hold on to and don't let go, then maybe we can all stay together.
Thank you, Chachi. That was great. Next up is Aaron, followed by Stefan. Aaron?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about boundaries, the big thing here is trust. And when I'm amongst strangers, people I don't know really well, or maybe just plain old don't like, I have really, high boundaries. Like I'm not going to just make myself vulnerable or tell them things that, like someone in the group earlier said, could be used against me, right? Like if there's no trust, then I think everybody has their guard up and they have extremely high boundaries. And trust is something that's earned. And the only way that you earn that trust is by having exchanges, and not just once or twice, but over the course of time. And I think that's essentially what happens between a client and the therapist, is that trust is built in that relationship where it's like, I know you, you know me. And if that trust is maintained and things are not done to break that trust, then the boundaries will get smaller and smaller and smaller. And like eventually the walls will just shatter and come down. But it takes a lot of hard work and it takes a lot of trust to get to that point.
Thank you. Next up is Stefan, followed by Claire. Stefan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking something somewhat similar to what Aaron just said. But first and foremost, I don't think there's ever going to be a blanket answer to this question, because everybody's got their own, the idea of boundaries, I think, is less to do with a person's individual boundaries and more to do with your relationship with other people. Because I find personally, as I'm more honest with a person, like a friend, the boundaries dissipate more and more. So the more I kind of dip my toe into the pool, the more these boundaries just shrink and shrink. Because I think when you're honest, then it gets rid of that. If you don't know somebody that well and then they start saying something that seems a little left field and you're not sure where they're coming from because you don't know them too much, and then you're more easily able to fill in the blanks with your own assumptions, and then you get pissed off at those. But then if you know the person well enough, like you've been honest with each other enough, you don't assume. And then when you don't assume, you're less likely to, get those little poisonous thoughts stirring in your head for a week, and then you just hate that person based on an illusion based on what they said. So it's a game where it's like closeness comes and goes even with the exact same person, right? Like you could have like a best friend, or like you're super close, super honest, and then you just kind of drift apart, and now everything offends both of you because you're not really listening anymore.
Yeah, that's great observations. Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. Next up is Claire, Kevin, Marisa, and Paul. Claire, go ahead.
Yeah, Peterson referred to this as a body-centered approach, which I just didn't really get, and I kind of skipped over. But I do think when I think about boundaries, and especially around truth-telling, there's a physical response that happens in the body when you hit up against one of those. And I think watching that, especially as you're doing your best not to lie and having an authentic conversation with someone else, you just feel it. Like you just feel that it feels, wrong and off. And so I think listening to that and being really attuned to that can help us we don't need to break down those barriers necessarily, but just seeing where they arise and watching it is really interesting.
Thank you, Claire. Next up is going to be Kevin, Marisa, and Paul.
Yeah, I believe boundary has kind of layer. It's like an onion. Let's see, two parties talking. The topic is first you need to interest in the topic both parties talking about. Then it's about which layer, how deep you're going to talk. Right, to peel back the layer one by one. Let's see what's boundary. Some people very sensitive about the privacy. Some people very sensitive about the wealthy or personality. So they have layer. Right? Then of course it's needed a trust level and a willingness to share. If let's see, I trust you, I'm not willing to talk this topic, so it's still not going to be a successful conversation.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Marisa.
when I hear talk of boundaries, I feel like my brain oscillates between which boundary I should focus on. Because, you know, we have there's just so, I like the use of the word layer that Kevin just used. Because I do find that there's so many different layers. For, you know, they're the cultural ones, your interfamilial boundaries, you know, the professional, personal, interpersonal. I do find that the concept that is presented to us by Peterson here with Carl Rogers is, I feel like it addresses boundaries in all boundaries, because what he's saying to us is not that boundaries are bad, but that there are more natural boundaries, and then more forced boundaries. And the very nature of being aware of our interactions with ourselves and with others is going to just erode some of those less natural boundaries. Like, for example, you know, he gives the example of, and this is one of my favorite things. It brings to mind to me, I'm making the assumption that there's several people here who may have been English as a second language in school. And now I was taught the mnemonic of, if you were uncertain of what the other person was saying, the best way to ensure that you were understanding was to repeat it back to them in your own words to verify that you have grasped what they were saying to you. And it was something that was taught to me as a little girl. And I find that when I'm having a very serious or very important conversation in my life today, and now, you know, I'm quite fluent in English. Years and years ago, I was a child in school, not knowing any English. But I find that I revert to that simple exercise when I find the conversation to be like very serious. Like I remember sitting in a restaurant when my engagement was falling apart with my fiance, my ex-fiance, and that's exactly what I did, right? And so Peterson actually brings that up as an exercise, and he says, but what I like that he gives me that had never occurred to me before was, he says, be aware when you're speaking. If you're speaking, or you start speaking, or you're about to speak, and something within you feels off or wrong or jittery or just apprehensive, stop and wonder to yourself, take a moment to question why it is that you're feeling this way. And he says 95% of the time, if we listen to that feeling that makes us pause when we're about to agree with someone or we're about to say something, it's that we're saying words that are somebody else's and not our own. And I find that to be so profound, because if you change the wording, what he's saying is you're hitting against a boundary that doesn't need to be there. If you stop and use your own words or your own idea, well, then you've now magically eradicated this boundary. And I just think that's a fascinating concept, because he's clarifying that if we can put ourselves in the shoes of our, you know, conversator, or that person with whom you may be disagreeing, you're paving the path towards understanding. And when there's understanding, there's either no boundary or a very soft and more neutral boundary.
Very nice, very nice. So let me make a comment on boundaries, and then I'll do one more round for comments about boundaries. So I want to connect up. See, one of the things that we do in these meetups is that we do syntopical thinking. So this point about boundaries came up yesterday when we were discussing systems. So, and we're talking about, that you have to look at system as a whole, and then you look at identified subsystems. And the art of really doing that is to see where the boundary is. What's the natural boundary? So I think the term natural boundary, and the boundaries are natural and they're dynamic. They keep changing over time. There are natural boundaries. So the first thing I want to see, there are natural boundaries. And there are artificial boundaries. So there are boundaries which actually protect you. It allows you to function fully because what it is, those boundaries are designed to keep things that would disrupt you, disrupt the right action, the proper action, so that that action and that boundary has a reason to be there, and that will keep changing with context. Okay, so it is. So I think the term natural kind of captures it, and it's important to remember that it is dynamic. The second set of ideas I want to bring to bear, which is one of my favorites, is Louis Sullivan's ideas of form and function. Okay, what you have to focus on is function. In order to achieve your function, you come up with structures to implement the function, which include conduits which will flow energy and boundaries which protect the flow of energy. So the structure that you design is for that function. Now, most people forget about the function and then they hold on to the form. They hold on to structures. That's what most of these social structures, there are reasons why some of the social structures exist. And that's important to understand it. But there is a whole bunch of structures about everything that sometime, maybe at some point they had reasons to be, but no longer have reason to be. In that case, they are artificial boundaries. So there is a difference between, and I think this concept of function and form, and you can always solve the problem by going back to the function. What are you trying to do? What is the right thing to do? And is this boundary actually helping anybody, or you, or the other person, or is it hurting? So, Tricia was talking about kind of defensive boundaries, valid boundaries versus defensive boundaries. Many of the boundaries are rooted in fear. You're saying, okay, I don't want to get hurt, or I don't want to lose something. So you just put boundaries. Maybe something might happen. So, so I think those are the points I wanted to make. So next up is Paul, followed by Joe. Anybody who has any further things to say about boundaries can go ahead and type exclamation mark. Paul, go ahead.
Thanks. Building on some of these really great comments, including the one Shrikant just made, and going all the way back to, I think it was Aaron who talked about trust to be earned. So I think one thing we maybe want to highlight that we haven't talked too much about, just touched on, is Carl Rogers and listening. So trust is earned, and trust is earned by a therapist or a friend. And one of the things Carl Rogers, I think, would teach us all is you don't just listen, you listen deeply and with this deep respect for the person, and that means for their boundaries too. So the person might say something like, I was afraid to go to this party last night or something. So Carl Rogers, and we should all just, he's watching their whole body language, as Claire mentioned. He noticed what they did when they said that. He noticed their tone of voice. He's picking up on the boundary and he's going to respect it. Now he can decide to push it or not, but he's so tuned in and respectful of it that he can really connect. So I just wanted to talk about listening in relationship to boundaries and Carl Rogers.
Absolutely. I want to make one more point because this is a point that Dave made and Jyoti made about in this meetup, we are actually doing this. Okay, we are trying to implement this, but you can also see the boundaries here. Okay, there are boundaries here, but those are very deliberately designed boundaries, transparent to everyone. For example, currently I'm saying we're talking only about boundaries. Now that's a boundary, okay? But what is it doing? It is an organic boundary. It is a boundary that allows a profound communication on this topic amongst all of us. Okay. If anybody were to start talking about something else, it will disrupt this. And I will immediately stop that. Okay. So I'm using a boundary, but it is a boundary which is very explicit, which is designed to facilitate what I'm doing. So that's next up is Joe, Stefan, and Chachi. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, really fantastic points by everyone. And I mean, that last point that you made, Shrikant, was really something that I'm just going to briefly build on just a little bit. The idea of how artificial boundaries create specialization in a way. And that, you know, that there's an element of what is right and what is wrong out of that. In how do we determine what is right and what is wrong? And it was funny because Trisha in our breakout group had actually brought up the idea of division of labor within relationships and how that's unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And that's a form of specialization. It actually is a very interesting, you know, I didn't want to go down that road actually between artificial and natural boundaries, but it was something that you know, just came up that was really interesting. And there's another part to this though I thought that was really important to mention, is that it's our role as well as, you know, helping to break down boundaries. And if somebody is acting in an ethical and a trustworthy way, my boundaries get lower. So if I know somebody, I'm working with somebody, and I know that they don't say something negative about other people, that they're trustworthy in keeping, keeping confidences, and then my boundaries start to lower from there. So ethical behavior has a way of not only we create boundaries, but we can also break them down. And that's a really important point, is that in that process, because the more trustworthy we behave, the more we'll be trusted. And it's kind of this relationship that helps us establish, you know, lower our own boundaries, but also, you know, lower other people's boundaries. So I think that that's a really important point. But I tell you, as far as the systems thinking part of it, that's the more interesting part. I wish I could go more into that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the what you're talking about ethics is simply principles. Ethics at the, you know, in the right context is simply principles that will enable life for you and others. And it's the principles that kind of sets the boundary for things that will disrupt life, and that will allow the kind of good life to flow, but stop any kind of negative word. That's what ethics, you know, kind of principles.
And Stoicism is the idea of the natural boundary, or our relationship with nature. You know, that's an interesting aspect of it as well, because you talked about natural boundaries, right?
Thank
so
you. Yep, excellent. Next up is Stefan, followed by Chachi.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a different point, I guess, but sometimes I think that people are afraid to, quote unquote, infringe on other people's boundaries when really they're just afraid of saying something that might make them look rude or mean. So they're thinking, oh, I don't want to hurt that person, but they're really just afraid of social ostracization, I think. This, not all the time, but I think sometimes this is definitely what is happening.
Yes. No, that's a great point. I think motivation by fear versus motivation by love, I think that's the big difference. Like many people, their primary motivation is fear. And if fear is there, what is fear? Fear, it means that you're assuming that largely the world is a danger to you. Other people are danger to you. And then what you need, obviously, if that is actually true, then you do need boundaries. So you have that unreasonable fear, and then you have, you know, you keep building on that. Next up is Chachi.
So I'm thinking about boundaries and how they come about. Because I think boundaries are created when you take a whole thing and you, like a pie, and you cut it up into pieces to share it. And then if you try to get all those pieces back into the pan, then you see all the boundaries and nothing fits together very easily. Everything's kind of a mess because you can never get things back exactly the way they came out. And it's very uncomfortable and it's just kind of chaos when it goes back. Because you have all these boundaries that weren't there when the pie was whole. And I guess sometimes it depends on how you deal with that. And that's all. That's what I struggle with.
Thank you. Thank you, Chachi. I want to recommend 2 meetups that are coming up that are actually connected to these. On Saturday at 2:30 p.m., we're doing a meetup on the concept of synergy, okay, which is really at the heart of all of this. This is synergy is the concept of, this is Buckminster Fuller's concept of synergy. It's very, very difficult concept. It's the core concept of his. And it's all about really what authentic relating is all about is synergy at one level, but he's looking at synergy at a far deeper level than what Rogers is doing, because Rogers is focusing on interpersonal communication. What he's looking at it is interpersonal communication. What Bucky is looking at is both interpersonal communication and conceptual things. How do you structure life? How do you structure society? And how does synergy work at that level? So many of the cultural issues, he will actually deal with, it's like we said, okay, there are cultural norms and those are don't have the proper structure and which is causing this. He's saying, okay, what should those be? Okay, and he's dealing with that. So it's kind of taking this same kind of thinking across. That's going to be Saturday at 2:30. Sunday at 2:30, we are starting a new series on polymaths. And one of the, and this is Angela is hosting that, and she's inviting a number of people to come and talk. And this time we're going to be talking about how to be a polymath. This is all about letting go of boundaries. What Tricia was talking about, division of labor. This is to kind of let go of the idea of disciplines. Yesterday we talked about, Akoff talking about that, of saying, problem is a problem. If you think of it as an education problem, many times the education problem is a, economic problem, or it's a social problem, or it's a psychological problem. You have to be able to go across all these fields to kind of figure it out. So that's also another way of actually relating to a problem or a situation, regardless, instead of using a standard kind of, not standard, but kind of a commonly used tool. This is kind of encouraging you to think in a polymath way or kind of transdisciplinary way of saying, what is actually going on and how do you solve it and how do you become like that? So that's what is going to be on Sunday. So Claire, we're coming close to 12 o'clock and everything turns into pumpkins at 12 o'clock, So so what's coming up with what are we doing next Thursday?
So we have an exciting sort of 3 weeks coming up. Next Thursday, we're going to be talking about Nietzsche and existentialism. A little bit of tidbit there is that God is dead, if you haven't heard, and we killed him. Crazy. And we're going to tell you what we should all be doing about it. The following week, we're going to go more deeply into the big five. We kind of brushed on this, but this will be our fun time to talk about personality types and ourselves and compare ourselves to each other's and think about everyone in our lives. And that will be fun. And then we're kicking off Maps of Meaning on, I want to say the 19th, third week of November. So if you haven't already, get your book on Amazon, or we'll have lots of videos for you, and we'll welcome Roger's return. So thank you guys all. It was a pleasure as always. You guys are the best.
Yeah, I echo that. It's just amazing to see these incredible people come and share things. I learn so much every day. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
All right.
Shrikant.